At 5:30 local time, a Russian Bayan M-class corvette drifting in the Sea of Azov was entering the final phase of preparing its Kalibr cruise missiles for a strike on Ukrainian infrastructure. The crew aboard the 949-ton vessel believed they were operating inside a protected maritime zone, completely unaware that for the previous 45 minutes they had been hunted by a 7-drone Ukrainian strike pack. In exactly 180 seconds, what looked like a routine dawn deployment would turn into a brutal demonstration of asymmetric naval warfare. The first drone in the attack package, a customized Rubaka kamikaze unit, surged forward at 400 km per hour as it crossed the coastline, immediately tripping the acoustic sensors of a Russian coastal defense post. The still morning air shattered with the roar of 23 mm anti-aircraft fire as streams of tracers ripped into the dawn sky. Every high-explosive incendiary round carried enough force to tear the drone's composite frame apart. But the Russian gunners were facing a problem that physics would not forgive. They were firing at the sound of the engine, yet at 400 km per hour the drone was already hundreds of meters ahead of its own acoustic signature. The gunner walked his fire toward the distinctive whine of the modified gasoline engine, but the lead Rubaka snapped hard left, driving its engine to maximum revs and screaming past the kill zone before the heavy gun barrel could fully traverse onto target. Its survival, however, instantly created a tactical crisis for the rest of the formation. The opening burst of fire had alerted every Russian air defense position within a 10-kilometer radius, and warnings were now racing through encrypted telegram channels faster than official military networks could process them. The most valuable currency any drone operator possesses is surprise, and in that moment, it was gone. On the operator's screen inside a bunker 300 kilometers away, the video feed suddenly erupted into static from high-voltage power lines that had blended into the darkness until the final instant. The drone jerked upward, its belly skimming barely 2 meters above 110,000 volts of live electricity. For 3 agonizing seconds, every instrument in the control station went haywire. The magnetic field twisted the digital compass into chaos while the video feed dissolved into gray flicker. The operator was flying blind now, relying entirely on muscle memory and the drone's last known vector. When the picture returned, a massive radio tower exploded out of the darkness directly ahead. With only milliseconds to spare, he banked hard left, missing the steel guide wires by inches. 30 seconds behind the lead Rubaka, 2 more drones followed through the same corridor of chaos, using the confusion created by the first aircraft to slip deeper into the defensive perimeter. These were Spear variants, built specifically to blind radar and rip open the path before the heavier Rudar units arrived. While the Rubakas forced the route open, 4 Bobber loitering munitions came in from the north, sacrificing speed for payload. Their warheads were designed not to suppress defenses, but to crack open a ship's hull. If the Rubakas were the spears, the Bobers were the hammers. But the warnings moving through Telegram had outrun the drones themselves. As the strike package neared the second defensive ring, a Repellent 1 electronic warfare system surged to life, blasting the airwaves with 400 watts of broadband electromagnetic interference. The lead Bobber's display went black as its control link vanished into the jamming field. Yet the Ukrainians had planned for exactly this moment. The instant the signal dropped, the drone's onboard computer shifted into autonomous terminal guidance, navigating by internal accelerometers and optical landmark recognition alone. Blind to the operator, it flew on through the electronic storm. 3 minutes later, as it cleared the jamming bubble, the feed snapped back online. The Bobber was still perfectly on course, having drifted less than 12 meters over 5 kilometers. But the relief lasted only seconds. Ahead, a BTR-82 armored personnel carrier blocked the highway, its 30 mm automatic cannon already firing into pre-calculated interdiction lanes designed to create a wall of shrapnel. The operator immediately shoved the drone down into an industrial zone, skimming rooftops to break line of sight. But the complex below was far from empty. Hearing the unmistakable lawnmower growl of the engines, Russian infantry poured from the buildings like an anthill kicked open. The drone held exactly 10 meters of altitude. At that height, the curvature of the Earth creates a natural radar shadow, a narrow cloak of invisibility. A radar station on elevated ground that can detect a high-flying target at 50 kilometers may only see a ground-hugging one at 12. Physics became the drone's shield against long-range detection, but it offered no protection against rifle fire. The aircraft threaded tiny invisible corridors of safety, while dozens of soldiers fired toward fleeting shapes and engine noise. Eventually, statistics caught up. Even with an extremely low hit probability per round, enough concentrated fire will connect. The third Rubaka spiraled into a concrete parking lot and detonated on impact, sending a shockwave across the complex. Now only 2 bobbers and 2 Rubakas remained. They could not afford to lose even one more airframe if the corvette was going to be crippled. As the lead Rubaka crested the final ridge before the coast, the operator's display filled with a silhouette that should never have been there. The mission briefing had been disastrously wrong. Waiting below was not an aging Soviet coastal defense unit, but a modern Pantsir I battery. In the next 4 seconds, the operator would have to make a decision that would either save the mission or doom every remaining drone. The Pantsir launched 6 missiles almost at once. These were not standard surface-to-air interceptors. They were newer anti-drone missiles developed after repeated humiliations by cheap unmanned systems. Each weighed only about 12 kilograms, but carried a fragmentation warhead packed with 200 tungsten spheres, designed to burst into a donut-shaped kill cloud optimized specifically for small UAVs. When triggered, those spheres would rip outward at roughly 1,800 meters per second, creating a lethal zone about 10 meters wide, more than enough to shred fragile composite wings. The operator used ladder engagement tactics, firing at staggered altitudes of 50 meters, 30 meters, and 10 meters, creating a 3-dimensional cage of death. But the Rubaka's pilot had studied the Pantsir's engagement envelope in detail and knew it had one crucial vulnerability, a 1.2-second arming delay after launch. That delay existed to stop the missile from detonating too close to its own launcher. At 432 kilometers per hour, the drone could cover 144 meters in that time. The instant he saw the missiles flare away from their tubes, the operator shoved the stick forward and dove directly toward the launcher in a suicidal game of chicken. The interceptors streaked overhead, still unable to arm, passing within meters of the drone without detonating. By the time they became lethal, the Rubaka was already beneath them, using the launcher's own safety design as a shield. The drone leveled out at 5 meters and lined up on the Podlet K1 radar vehicle, the system feeding targeting data to Russian launchers across a 200-kilometer area. The Pantsir's twin 30mm cannons immediately opened up, both barrels cycling at a combined rate so high it seemed to stitch a solid wall of fire across the air. The Russian gunner tried to box the drone in, saturating rectangular sectors where the computer predicted it would be. But the fire control chain had a lag that no software could overcome. The system needed time to calculate trajectory, more time for the heavy servos to traverse, and still more time for the rounds to reach the target. Altogether, the delay stretched to roughly 3.5 seconds. The drone operator simply changed course every 2. The Russian computer was solving a geometry problem that was already outdated before the answer appeared. The Rubaka punched through the curtain of fire and slammed directly into the radar antenna. Its shaped charge detonated with the Monroe effect, crushing a copper liner into a hypersonic jet. The metal did not melt in the conventional sense. Under immense pressure, it behaved like a fluid, punching through armor at roughly 7,000 meters per second. The jet tore through the antenna array, destroyed the processing hardware, and exited out the far side in a spray of superheated copper. With the primary fire control radar gone, the second Rubaka turned toward the nearby P-18 spoon rest early warning radar. The Pantsir crew switched to thermal backup, but the timing was terrible. Dawn had produced a temperature inversion, trapping cool air beneath warmer layers and generating thermal shimmer and false signatures. The drone's motors emitted very little heat, only slightly above ambient, and against the warming sea and patchy cool ground it flickered in and out of visibility. The thermal system had been designed to track hot jet engines, not a small drone with a minimal heat signature. Lock quality collapsed. The gunner switched to desperation fire, spraying a widening spiral from the drone's last known position. That kind of water hose tactic might work against a helicopter. It does not work against a drone that can pivot 90 degrees in half a second. Thousands of rounds were expended, none hit. Seconds later, the second Rubaka smashed into the P-18 dead center, wiping out roughly 200 kilometers of radar coverage in one blow. With both major radar systems destroyed, the corvette sitting 4 kilometers offshore was suddenly deaf, blind, and isolated. Without the Podlet and P-18 providing early detection and tracking, the ship's own sensors were reduced to the horizon line. Against low-flying threats, that meant barely any warning time at all. The defensive shield around the vessel had just vanished. The ship preparing to launch missiles at Ukrainian cities was now alone. The corvette's radar finally detected the incoming drones at around 4 kilometers, but what appeared on screen were unstable ghost contacts, flickering in and out between the wave tops. The Russians faced an almost impossible problem, distinguishing drones flying 3 meters above the water from waves rising to 2. Both returned similar radar signatures. Doppler filtering, which normally separates movement from clutter, performed badly because the drones were maneuvering unpredictably. The clutter rejection software, built to discard sea spray and false echoes, began discarding real threats instead. On every third radar sweep, the drones vanished from the display entirely because the processor decided they were probably noise. That did not stop the crew from trying their last line of defense. The AK-630 M2 Duet spun up with a metallic whine, and twin 30mm rotary cannons unleashed 10,000 rounds per minute. The fire control computer attempted to generate intercept paths using predictive filtering, estimating future position from previous movement and current sensor data. But the drone operators were deliberately corrupting the math, making random control inputs every 2 seconds. The Duet had been built to destroy large anti-ship missiles flying relatively predictable attack profiles, not light drones maneuvering erratically. It was like swinging a sledgehammer at a hummingbird. The computer needed several seconds to produce a reliable solution. The drones changed direction before the solution was ever valid. Failing to hit anything, the Corvette launched chaff from its PK-10 decoy system. Clouds of aluminum strips burst into the air, each cut to resonate with radar wavelengths and create false returns larger than the drones themselves. Against radar-guided missiles, this would have been deadly effective. Against drones piloted by humans watching high-definition video feeds, it was meaningless. The operators looked straight through the glittering distraction and kept the ship centered in their screens. Next came the TK-25E electronic countermeasure suite, dumping jamming power across a broad frequency range. That would have crippled conventional radio-controlled drones, but the Ukrainian systems were using frequency-hopping spread spectrum, jumping across 128 channels per second in a pseudo-random pattern shared only between transmitter and receiver. The interference caused frame drops, distortion, and pixelation. The feed degraded from 1080p to 480p. Annoying, yes. Mission ending, no. Seeing what was unfolding, the Corvette's captain ordered evasive S-turns at maximum speed, but physics again refused to negotiate. A 949-ton warship needs time to change heading. A drone needs milliseconds. The lead bobber operator studied the ship's rhythm and timed his run for the brief steady interval between course changes. At 500 meters, he switched to full manual control. The radar mast now filled the screen, 6 meters of critical electronics standing above the deck. The Duet system could not depress far enough to engage such a low approach. At close range and just 3 meters above the surface, the bobber had dropped beneath its firing arc. Sailors with PKM machine guns opened up from the deck, but they were trapped by human biology. The drone crossed their field of view in less than a second. Human eyes need time to focus, track, and align. By the time they fired, they were shooting at an afterimage. The first bobber smashed into the mast, head-on. Instantly, the ship's radar, communications, and data links went dark. Its missiles could no longer be launched effectively. The Corvette had become a floating target. The second bobber came in at a 30-degree angle toward the port side, its operator aiming for the section near the missile magazine behind only 15 millimeters of steel plating. At 100 meters, he made one last correction, compensating for the ship's drift and slight list from its evasive turn. A shaped charge must hit at exactly the right angle for maximum penetration. Too shallow and it glances, too steep and energy is wasted. He had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times in simulation. But no simulation includes shaking hands, salt spray on the lens, and the knowledge that failure means more missiles striking Ukrainian cities. The bobber hit exactly where it needed to. Its shaped charge formed a molten jet moving at roughly 7,000 meters per second. The steel plate offered almost no resistance. The jet punched through and sprayed superheated copper across ammunition and missile components inside the compartment. 3 critical failures erupted at once. High-pressure hydraulic fluid atomized across electrical panels, igniting instant arc fires. Missile coolant lines ruptured, releasing toxic chemical derivatives. Most dangerously of all, warhead safety interlocks disconnected, leaving 8-caliber missiles armed but unusable. The Corvette did not sink, but it limped back to port 12 hours later with a blackened superstructure and a hull torn open in multiple places. Repairs would take at least 18 months. Ukrainian operators sitting in bunkers 300 kilometers away had crippled a warship worth roughly $500 million using systems assembled from commercially accessible components and battlefield adaptation. Yet the initial strikes were only the beginning of the real disaster. Deep inside the ship, the damage control teams were not simply fighting fire, they were fighting chemistry and thermodynamics. The Corvette's superstructure, built from a lightweight aluminum-magnesium alloy to reduce displacement, began burning at extreme temperatures, creating a Class D metal fire that normal water hoses could not extinguish. In fact, when desperate sailors sprayed the flames, the intense heat split water molecules apart on contact, releasing hydrogen and oxygen and effectively feeding the blaze rather than suppressing it. Corridors turned into furnaces. Ventilation shafts, designed to keep sensitive electronics cool, now acted like chimneys, pulling toxic vapors and combustion products straight into command spaces. One by one, the captain watched his tactical displays flicker out, not directly because of the drone impacts, but because the silver zinc batteries in the backup power systems entered thermal runaway. In the end, it was not just the shaped charges that removed the corvette from the war. It was the unforgiving logic of physics itself, turning the vessel's own advanced materials and internal systems against it. That is what made this strike so devastating. It was not simply a successful drone attack. It was the perfect exploitation of every weakness built into a larger, more expensive, more heavily armed platform. Radar blind spots, reaction time delays, thermal distortion, signal lag, human limitations, design trade-offs, safety protocols. All of it was identified, studied, and weaponized. And by the time the Russian crew understood what was happening, the engagement had already been decided. In just 3 minutes, a ship that believed it was safe enough to prepare cruise missiles for an attack on Ukrainian infrastructure had been stripped of its radar umbrella, cut off from its defensive network, and mauled by a swarm of low-cost unmanned systems. The corvette survived the encounter, but only technically. As a fighting platform, it was gone. And what remained in its wake was a brutal lesson written across the Sea of Azov. In modern warfare, survival no longer belongs automatically to the side with the bigger ship, the heavier gun, or the higher budget. It belongs to the side that understands the battlefield more completely and weaponizes that understanding faster.